Okay, so I'm back. So let's talk about the let me see. I need to okay, so let's talk about the let's go to the all right, so slide. All right. So we're gonna deal with the models, okay? So what is a model? So model is the model is a model. How come this is all my color? Let me see. Okay, so so when we study economics, we have a model. So model is a tool to understand the real world, but model cannot be too complicated. If it's the same as the real world, then there is no point of having the model because we can just look at the real world, right? But at the same time, if it's too simple, then it's not gonna give us enough intuition or the story why the economy works in a certain way. So model has to be not too complicated, but not too simple. Okay. But for now, yeah. So that's an art of a modeling. But anyway, um, but one thing that's sure is that it's much simpler than the real world. So model is a highly simplified representation of an aspect of the real world, right? So it helps economists to understand the fundamental forces that determine the movement of economic variables, like GDP, price of lead, or R&D activities, and so on. Okay, and model typically contains two types of variables. So one is exogenous, and the other is endogenous variable. So um, so the exogenous means the exo means outside. Okay, so that's the etymology of the X, and genus means generate or the make. So the exogenous variables are the variables set up outside the model. Okay, so this is the given outside the model. And the endogenous models is endo means inside. Okay, and the genus means is the same thing. So these are the variables made inside. So in other words, these are the variables that had to the value of which has to have to be determined in the model. Okay. So a model is typically specifies a relationship between these two types of variables, endogenous and exogenous variables. So again, the exogenous variables are the variables that are given in the model. So in other words, it's the values are set up, it's given outside the model. Okay, so it's not determined in the model. So yeah, maybe I should not have used the word in here. So variables are the the value of which are given is exogenous variable. But the variables that are determined in the model is endogenous variables that's computed as an equilibrium value or the optimum of the values. Okay, so I'll give you an example. It's a supply and demand model. So we all know this one, right? Um, let's see. This is blue. Yeah. Um, so you all know the supply and demand curve, right? So here's a supply and here's a demand, right? And the equilibrium is determined here. This is quantity and this is the price, right? And so, so you all know this. I hope so. Okay. Um, okay. But we also learned that this thing called like a movement along the um, So movement along the curve, or it might be the case that curves is moving, right? So maybe the curves are moving. So these are two different things, right? So I guess you learned it in high school, right? So I'll give you an example. So yeah, so this is an example. So let's say um, so this is the demand for the corn. Okay. Oh, sorry, corn. Okay, so the demand of the corn is given by this one. So this is the price, and this is the income. Okay, so that's why I use the word I, the letter I. And the supply curve is given by the price and the rainfall. Okay, so this is the rainfall. So if the income is higher, then you probably want to consume more corn. And if the price goes up, then you probably want to decrease your demand, right? And similarly for the supply, if the price of the corn goes up, then you want to supply more. And if the rainfall goes up, then the production of the corn goes up so that you want to so that you can produce the more corn given the same rainfall. I'm sorry, given the same price, right? All right. So how do you find the equilibrium? So so here's the demand and here's the supply, and the equilibrium will be here, right? So for given income and so for given income and rainfall, the demand is equivalent to the price supply. That's the equilibrium, right? And if you solve for P, we get this one. And if you solve for Q, you get this one. Okay. So this is the equilibrium price, and this is the equilibrium quantity. Okay, which is different from um, I mean, in the end, they're going to be the same, but ex ante, they're not the same thing, right? So here, when you look at the demand curve, so this is a P and Q, right? So as P changes, Q changes, right? But at the same time, if income is changing, what happens is that if income goes up, demand curve goes up. If the income goes down, the demand curve goes down, right? So there are two different things. Moving along the curve, moving along the curve, or the curve is moving itself, right? So that I'm sure you learned that in high school, right? So anyway, so this is the equilibrium price and the quantity. Um, right, so this is the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So as you see here, when income goes up, so let's say income goes up by $1, that means price goes up by 1/20s and quantity goes up by $5, right? If delta I goes up $2, then price increases by 1/10 and quantity increases by 10, right? So we can do this kind of analysis. So if the rainfall decreases by 10, what happens? Then price will go up by $1 and the quantity will goes down by $100, 100 units, right? And if the rainfall goes up by 20, then price decreases by $2 and the quantity decreases, sorry, increases by 200 units, right? So we can do this kind of analysis. So what I'm doing here is that as the exogenous variable, so the rainfalls are not determined by the supply and demand, right? So this is given outside the model. So the rainfall is not determined by the supply and demand of the corn, right? So when the exogenous variable changes, this endogenous variables also changes, right? Okay, so these are the I'm sorry. not endogenous. These are the exogenous variable, and these are endogenous variable, right? Endogenous variable. So similarly, we can do the same thing, right? So the income, when we are looking at the corn market, income is not exogenous, it's not an endogenous variable, right? Income is, I mean, to be precise, if you're the seller, the how much you can sell the corn determines your income. And even if you're a consumer, depending on how much money you spend on the corn, the money you can spend on something else also changes, right? So in that sense, income may not be really, really exogenous, but let's say corn is taking a small fraction of your total expenditure, then we can think of the income as an exogenous variable, right? So anyways, and so given that income is an exogenous variable, um, you can see how the endogenous variables are changing here, right? Something's wrong here. Oh, I see. This is okay. So this is called comparative statics, right? So this is called comparative statics, and this is the main tool. So this is the main way of analyzing the economy, right? So we're interested in how the interest rate moves when unemployment changes, right? So so let's say you're the policymaker, you can, you may have some policy tools to change the unemployment rate, like you can give some subsidies or the subsidy for the additional education, in-job education, and so on, right? And when it changes, how does it affect the interest rate? So that's kind of that's a comparative statics, right? So as a policymaker, you can change certain things, and as a result of the change in this policy tool, policy variables, what happens to the economy? So that's the endogenous variables, right? So that's what we're gonna do uh, in the rest of your 3 years in the Department of Economics. Okay. All right. So that's the basic of the model you are going to learn in the next 3 years. All right. You look at the exogenous variables and how the endogenous variables are determined through by the exogenous variables. Okay. All right. So so there's a funny story about this supply and demand curve. So when I was a high school student, so I learned this supply and demand curve thing, and it was really difficult for me. So the um, I never understood the movement of the demand curve or the movement of the supply curve with the movement along the line, right? So basically, I failed to understand movement of the curve or the movement along the curve. The distinguishing the two things were really confusing to me. So I always got the wrong answer. In the end, so the answer, so I was supposed to pick one answer out of the four choices. So if I pick the choice saying price goes up and quantity goes down, and that is always the opposite of the correct answer. So the correct answer was always the price goes down and the quantity goes up. It always moved the other direction. So in the end, I just gave up to understand what's going on, and instead I choose the answer that was the opposite of the answer I thought correct. And I could get the correct answer all the time, right? And I'm teaching economics right now. So If I could do that, I'm sure you can do that too, okay? So even if you thought economics was a difficult subject, don't be this look at me and get some hope, okay? All right. All right, I'll take 5 minutes and I'll continue.